I really have to appreciate when Father Abraham is sung and there's not tongues out and heads bobbing and 3 heart attacks later. I really appreciate that. Well, good morning again, everybody. I also inherited this trait from my mom. You might have noticed it because I was up front. I started doing right foot. That's the left foot. So I'm really glad that Jordan led that song today because we've been doing kind of this character series of studies looking at these heroes in the Old Testament and looking at these characters and these heroes of faith like I talked about last week. And you can find this term, this hero of faith term, it's in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. And the Hebrew author kind of gives us a list of these heroes of faith and how they were righteous before God. So that's what we've been talking about. It's kind of the intro to this series, if you will. And last week we looked at one of those heroes of faith in the Old Testament in the Bible. We looked at Noah. And Noah being kind of an underrated hero of faith because we tell him as a kid's story, but man, he really was. Noah was the only righteous guy in the entire world when we pick up his story. He was the only one. I talked about how sometimes you can feel kind of alone in a church, like there's nobody my age. Think about being the only one who believed God in the entire world. That's where Noah was at, but yet he still had faith in God. He still had faith in God, and then God comes to him and he tells him his plan about how he's going to destroy the world. And Noah's part is, you got to build a big boat, a really big boat. In fact, it's going to take you 100 years to build this boat. And Noah did it for 100 years. And he still believed in God. So now he's the only person that believes in God, and he's got to look like a complete crazy person building a boat for 100 years. And then he's got to deal with animals. He's got to load that boat with a male and a female of every kind. But by the time all of that's done, he's still remaining faithful to God. He takes his family and their families on the boat, on the ark, and God shuts the door behind them. But Noah is still faithful. But that's not the end of the story. He's on that boat for a year. 40 days and nights of rain to get it kick-started. I talked about how we're kind of over a storm, especially a snowstorm, in about day 2.5, right? That's too long. 40 days and nights, he still remained faithful. Finally, he hits land, and they make an altar to God, and he remains faithful. After everything that he's gone through, he remained faithful. So I shared the story of Noah last week, and I said, let's have a faith like Noah. But I didn't want you to think he wasn't a human, because we talked about the rest of the story right there at the end, about how he too was a human. He fell down in his tent drunk and naked. He had some troubles there at the end, but he still remained faithful to God. So have a faith like Noah and remind yourself when you mess up, maybe like Noah, you can still have a strong faith in God. So today we're going to talk about the same thing. We're going to talk about having a strong faith in God, but we're going to talk about another character. We're going to tell you the story of Abraham. And if you've been doing the one-year Bible or you've looked at Genesis ever before, you know that it's pretty crazy that I want to tell you the story of Abraham, because we've got probably 20 chapters if we really took everything for Abraham. And last time I checked, you can't read 20 chapters in 25 minutes. So we're not going to be able to talk about everything in Abraham. But I want to talk about the story of Abraham because he too was a hero of faith. If you look at where we were at in Hebrews chapter 11 last week, it's Noah in verse 7, Hebrews 11:7. And then in verse 8 it says, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. Verse 8 here, this is kind of the introduction verse from Noah to Abraham in this hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Now, if you want to know more of Abraham's story, actually hanging out here in Hebrews is a great place. The Hebrew author talks about Abraham a lot. You can probably keep going for about 10 more verses about Abraham right here. So we go from Noah to Abraham, both considered fathers of the faith. In fact, Abraham is considered by Christians and the biblical writers and the apostles and the early Christians, he's actually considered and talked about as the father of the faith. That terminology is given to him. Abraham's like the father over Christianity. He's a pillar of faith, a father of faith. And he was called by God. And we'll talk about his story a little bit more here in just a minute, but I wanted you to see how he was also counted as faith. What would one thing, if I asked you as a room of Christians, people who read the Bible, what would you say in like one sentence? What did Abraham do? What was his big deal? And you can't use faith because I already used it. What would a word, maybe just one word, maybe a couple of words, what would you say Abraham was committed? Oh, that's a good word. Steadfast, that's another good word. What's obedient? These are all coming. Trusting? Trusting? Oh man, Nancy got it on the head, right? All of these come right to that same point. Abraham is famous for trusting in God. And again, he's got like 20 chapters that you can read about his tug and pull of trusting in God. You can find him there in Genesis 12 through 25 is the bulk of it. He trusted God, followed God no matter what came along. And this is part of what makes him a father of the faith. Paul would actually talk about him as a father in the faith in Romans. Let me get you there. Romans chapter 4. And I put God's in a parentheses here so you know the context. But God's purpose in Romans 4:11 was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised, so that righteousness would be counted to them as well. Again, I just took one verse, but this is talking about Abraham. God's purpose with Abraham was to make him the father of all who believe, even those not circumcised. Really, really interesting. When we look at the bloodlines and all of that stuff, we actually find out that Jesus came from the bloodline of Abraham. And so this comes true. But Abraham never knew it. Abraham never knew that he was going to be the father of Christians. He never knew that he was going to be the bloodline of Jesus. All he knew was to trust and obey God. To be steadfast, to be obedient. These words you guys said, to trust God. So I think if there's anything we should ever take from Abraham, let's take this really good thing that he did. Trusting God, obeying God. Trust and obey. That's what we should do. There you go. That could be the end. That's what you should do, right? But, you know, trusting God, what does that even mean? We say it pretty often. Sometimes we say Christian churchy things like they're normal. But, you know, I don't know if that's really a normal thing. What does that mean? Well, we sing about it. You know, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Yeah, we sing about it, right? I mean, surface level, we know what it's like to trust and obey. Oh, okay, you guys didn't really sing. Maybe this one. Follow Jesus, trust and obey. That's Kanye. No? Okay. We sing about it. We sing about it in our old school hymns. Kanye sings about it, you know, doing whatever craziness he does. But what does it mean to follow Jesus and to trust and obey? Well, I think the best way we can say what does it mean is if we go look at Abraham who trusted God and we see how he did it. Because defining something is often best defined by giving examples. So what does trusting God look like? So today I want to look at the story of Abraham, and it's a big one, so we're going to have to hop around a little bit. But let's grab some nuggets of how Abraham trusted God. And maybe we'll know a little bit more about trusting God, a little deeper than just a Kanye West lyric. Sound good? Let's start off here in Genesis chapter 12. For most people, they'd say Genesis chapter 12 is where really Abraham's story gets going, gets started. Again, Abraham is all throughout Genesis. You got a lot that you can dig through there. But let's read together. We're going to have to do a lot of reading to look at Abraham's story. So let's start here in Genesis chapter 12. This is the first 4 verses of the chapter about Abram at this point. Let's read about Abram. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth, they shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. All right. So the Hebrew author in chapter 11 says, Abraham was faithful because he followed where God told him to go. This is the beginning of the story of him following where God told him to go. You notice a couple of things here? First off, Abram gets to talk to God, and God's talking to him. The Lord said to Abram. Okay, that's a valuable little piece of information sometimes we just cruise past, right? God told Abram straight up, face to face, voice to voice, no better way to hear it than from God himself. And what's God say? He says, here's what you got to do. You need to leave your country and your family and your father's house and everything you've ever known, and I need you to go someplace. He didn't tell him where. He wasn't like, I need you to move to Nebraska from Wyoming. He didn't say that. He said, I need you to go that way. And what's Abraham do? Abram at this point. He does. He leaves his family. He leaves the farm, the ranch, the house, everything, and he takes his crew, his family, and he leaves like God had told him to. Oh yeah, and by the way, he's, this isn't like a promotion at 25 years old. He's 75. Most people at 75 kind of don't want to go on a journey. But yet God told him, go on a journey. So he departed from Haran, where he had been with his family, on this journey that God had told him. Already, I think Abram is trusting God. Because it takes a lot of trust to just go where somebody has told you, even if it's God, without knowing what the outcome's going to be. It takes a lot of trust to leave everything you know behind, including your family. It takes a lot of trust to just go the direction that God has called you. But he did it. So how do we trust and obey, or follow Jesus and trust him? Well, first example here is when God calls, listen. When God tells to go, go. That's what he did to Abram. Now, we're going to move through the story by chunks. There's no way I could do it. So we're going to hop over to chapter 15. So Abram has been called and he goes. That's where we kind of left off. And his story is kicked off by him listening to God and having this communication. But if we're going to learn to trust, we need to see more of the story. So let's pick up here, getting into the meat a little bit of Genesis chapter 15. So he's gone, he's going. Let's pick up here with God's promise. Genesis 15, verses 1 through 6. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue to be childless. And the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, "Behold, you've given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir." And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. "This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir." And he brought him outside and said, "Look toward heaven, and the number of the stars. Are you able to number them?" Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. All right, I know I feel like I'm jumping in the story because I am, right? But back in chapter 12, when God told him to leave the land and to go, he said to him, "I will make you a great nation of many peoples." Abraham has no descendants of his own. He's traveling this direction because God told him to. And here we come to chapter 15, and he has this dialogue with God. He has this dialogue about how in the world am I going to have a great nations that come from me because I have no heir of my own? Abram is saying to God basically at this point, dude, I don't have any kids. How am I going to have generations and nations to follow me? All I got's this guy, and he's not related to me. Eleazar, right? But God tells him, I got a promise for you, Abram. The promise is the same. You will have generations and nations, and they will come from your offspring, from your heir. It's not going to be Eleazar's guy. It's going to be you. You are going to make a great nation. So, Abraham had a little wavering there, didn't he? Abram did. But yet, at the end of his dialogue with God, he's still trusting God, and he believed the Lord. Still hasn't seen it happen yet. He doesn't know what the plan looks like, but he believes. He trusts and obeys. And so it was counted to him as righteousness. How do we trust God? Well, even when God tells us the plan and it doesn't make no sense, we say, I believe you, Lord, but it don't make no sense. But I believe you, Lord, and it'll be counted as righteousness. It'll be trusting God. So when God tells you to go, go. When you don't understand how, say, I believe you, Lord. I just don't get it. I just don't get it, but I believe you, Lord. That's how you trust God. Oh, but Abraham's journey, life, story is long. So I'm going to hop forward again. 2 chapters. It's a good hopping amount, right? He really doesn't know how this is going to happen, but God reveals it to him in Genesis chapter 17. He says in verse 19, Sarah, your wife, she shall bear you a son, and you shall call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. Finally, Abram, he gets a little bit of detail about how it's going to work. I'm saying this so nonchalantly, but we're talking about years, by the way. By the time that Isaac actually comes along, we've covered 15 years? Am I doing that right? It's talking about years. But finally, he gets a little glimpse of God's promise to him and the details. I'm a details person. I don't like years to wait for them, though. But he stayed faithful and trusting to God, and finally God tells him here in Genesis 17, you will have a son. You shall call him Isaac. And your wife, Sarah, she's going to be the one that's going to bear him to you. And through him I will establish my covenant, an everlasting covenant, with him and his offspring after him. Isaac's going to be the one. This is how I'm going to make these great nations. This is how I'm going to make a great offspring. This is the promise. So, he trusts in God. He stays faithful, but it hasn't happened yet. In fact, he kind of has to ask for some reminders, and he gets some reminders. We see a reminder here in Genesis 18, verse 10, where God, the Lord, says to him, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening in the door of the tent behind him. Don't keep reading. Genesis 18:10. He had to get reminded. He had to remember what these promises are. Oh yeah, and he gets to wait another year. How do you trust in God? You can ask for some reminders. The other side of that is, how do you trust in God? You wait another year. You practice patience. So how do you trust in God? Well, you go where he says. Right? You go where he says. You believe in what he's told you. You have to practice patience, and you can ask for some reminders. That's how you trust in God, looking at Abraham. So after all of those years, God pulls through. Is that a surprise to you that God pulls through? He does. Genesis 21, 2 more chapters, we see God pulling through. First 5 verses. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Remember when he left the land? That was 25 years ago. God pulled through. God's promise was true. But Abraham trusted for 25 years that it was true. And he didn't get it. He didn't understand it. He didn't know how it was going to work. And by this point, I think he thought it was ridiculous. Okay, who here wants to have a baby at 100 years old? Just to be a daddy again. All right, yeah. I'm not even sure I want to live to be 100 years old. That's starting to be a long time. Abraham has a newborn at 100 years old. Sarah's old too. But he trusted in God the whole time, 25 years, and finally God pulled through and gave him Isaac, who was going to be the catalyst for generations and generations and peoples like the stars. How cool is that? Finally, Abraham has the promise of God. But if there's one thing in all of the story of Abraham that we all remember, it's what this little picture is here on the screen. It's the story of Abraham that happens in the next chapter. So we were just in chapter 21 of Genesis. Flip on over to chapter 22. We're not going to be able to read the whole thing today, okay? But it'll probably only take you a couple minutes if you go over to Genesis chapter 22. You've got time later today. I invite you to read it. But Genesis chapter 22, this story is what many of us think about. Because a good chunk of time has passed from chapter 21 to chapter 22. God's promise has been fulfilled to Abraham. He has Isaac finally. And then we get to chapter 22, and God tells Abraham to do something crazy. The long and short of the story, I invite you to read it, Genesis 22. God speaks directly to Abraham again, and he says, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go up onto the mountaintop and sacrifice your son as a burnt offering on the altar. It'll be glorifying to me. Now, if I'm Abraham, God tells me that, I got a lot of things going through my brain, and most of them are like, no, right? But going through my brain, I'm like, all right, so we know that pagan worshipers kill their children, and you want me to do that? Also, this is the kid that you told me I would have generations and descendants from. He's only 4.5. How is he supposed to have generations and descendants? Because he's probably 4 or 5 at this age. He doesn't have any kids of his own. So if I'm Abraham, I'm thinking, God, this doesn't make any sense. You told me descendants like the stars. This is the one that starts it. You want me to kill him? But Abraham doesn't say that. Abraham tells God again that he trusts him. So we see him get up in the morning, take Isaac, head up the mountain, because he's going to trust God even when it's crazy. And again, Isaac's 4 or 5. You know how 4 or 5-year-old kids are. They don't make anything easy on you. So on the way up, Isaac's asking all those pesky questions like, where's the lamb we're going to sacrifice, Dad? We have the wood. We have the altar. Don't we need the thing on top? Little 4-year-olds, man, they ask weird questions. And what's Abraham says? Well, he says God will provide. Again, trusting God. That had to be a hard answer for Abraham. Because the truth of the matter was, whether it was Isaac or it was an animal, God still provided. Man. All right, I can't leave you in the middle of the story. They make it up to the mountain. He's preparing the altar. Again, Isaac says there's wood. Where's the sacrifice? He's starting to figure it out. Abraham puts him on the altar. He bound him, put him on the wood, and he's got the knife ready to kill his son, because that's what God told him to do. And in that moment, an angel of the Lord says to Abraham, stop. Stop. You have proven your trust and faith and righteousness to God. You know, have you ever had that relief when you're like, oh, this was just a test? Most of the time we don't like tests, but sometimes it's a little relieving to say, I'm so glad that this was just to see if I could do it. That's what it was for Abraham. He trusted God the whole way, though, and he was going to do it. He was going to kill the only son that was all the offspring. And look at that conveniently at the end of the story. Isaac's question is answered because look over there. In the thicket is stuck a ram. Perfect. So they don't sacrifice Isaac, but instead God provided. But man, that had to take some trust. It just is crazy, God. It doesn't make any sense. But he still trusted God, and he didn't know what the outcome was going to be. It could have been, actually it wasn't Isaac. I got a different plan for you. But he trusted God the whole time. So if there's one thing you take home today about the story of Abraham, just like Noah, have faith like Noah and trust God like Abraham. Because man, he's a great example of trusting God and being obedient and following, trust and obey. But also like Noah, he also was a human guy. So I'll throw a little wrench in the end of the story with you here. How about that? Abraham, like Noah, was a human who trusted God but also faltered every once in a while. In fact, if we go back to Genesis chapter 16, you can find this later. God first tells him that he's going to have this son named Isaac. I stopped the verse at a very specific point because Abraham's response is, I'm too old. Right? He's old at this point. He's 90. I'm too old. He laughs at God. Tell you one thing you probably shouldn't do. Probably shouldn't laugh at God. Because he'll make a lot of options to laugh later if you do that, right? So, Abraham wasn't perfect. He laughed at God even though he trusted. He got back on track and kept trusting God. But I want to remind you that he was perfect. We see in Genesis chapter 16 that Abraham, even though he trusted God, him and Sarah came up with maybe a quicker plan. You ever come up with quicker plans of God's plan? I do that often. I'm like, I like that, but let's do it now. Abraham and Sarah, they came up with one of those together, and the plan for that was, we got this servant lady named Hagar. I'm not having any babies, dear. Why don't, have a baby? So they do that. And they try to expedite God's plan. But instead of having Isaac, born of Sarah, like God had promised, now they have Ishmael, born of Hagar. And like Noah, to this generation and the generations to come, Now there's division because there's brother and stepbrother and nations that are fighting one another. Because Abraham wasn't perfect. He tried to expedite God's plan. I try and do that too. But trust God. What about Genesis chapter 16? Chapter 17 is where he laughs. We can go the next chapter, Abraham laughs. And then chapter 18, Sarah laughs. You might have noticed I did this verse back here very strategically where I cut that. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him, and she laughed. I had to cut that off so you didn't know. This is when God comes straight to Abraham in the form of a man. The Lord comes to him. And when he's there telling Abraham, Sarah's back there laughing that it's going to happen. So Abraham and Sarah, they weren't perfect. They stumbled like people do. They stumbled like Noah did. They stumbled like we do. Because we still stumble as well. But they trusted God. So that's the number one thing I want you to take home today. Trust in God like Abraham. How do you do it? Look at his story. Look at how he just went when God told him to go. Look at how he believed when he didn't understand how it was going to work. Look at how he trusted God and was patient for another year. That's how you trust God. If you want to learn how to mess up too, there's some of those. But I'm pretty good at doing that. I need to work on trusting God. So the story of Abraham, why might it be important to us as Christians today? Well, there's that cool little nugget that he is the father of the faith. He brought the bloodline of Jesus. And he didn't realize it at the time, but this promise was not just Isaac and descendants of people, but it was descendants all the way to everybody, the Gentiles. Why? Because Jesus brought salvation to everybody. Now I get it. I get why Abraham's descendants are the stars. Because it wasn't just a bloodline, it was anybody that followed Jesus. So, when you think about Abraham, you can say, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham, and I am one of them. And so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, because that's true. Because through Jesus, through Abraham, we all got salvation. So have trust in the Lord like Abraham. You might stumble. You might mess up. If you don't, let me know. I'll find something. Keep each other accountable. It'll just go one way that time, though. Okay, no. But have trust in God like Abraham. And who knows? Hopefully, someday, somebody can say, Father, Mother, whatever your name is, trusted God. And because of them, we trust God today. How cool would that be? If you started a generational legacy of trusting God, that would change the world. That's the story of Abraham. We'll keep looking at some of these Old Testament characters next week. But until then, Jordan had to leave, so I get the opportunity to do the closing song. So let's stand up for this last song. And since it's supposed to be Jordan's job, I figured I'd teach you a new song. Who knows this song? Anybody know this song? Oh, Courtney knows it. Sweet. There's one person.